welcome to your Pottery Experience Christmas decorations making workshop. Now today I'm going to talk you through the process of making your own set of either Christmas bells or flat decorations. Before we get started, you might want to get yourself set up with a nice cup of tea, glass of bubbly, maybe some snacks, get the music on. We have sent you in an email a playlist for our classical Christmas music, but feel free to go wild and just put Last Christmas on repeat as well. We're going to start off talking about designs and plans. So hopefully by now you'll have had a look on the Pinterest pages that we've made for you. So there's two separate ones, one which is more bells and one which is more flat decorations. From there we can start thinking about what you might like to make. Now the first thing I'd always advise doing before you start making is to draw. These drawings, they don't matter, no one else is going to see them unless you decide to show them, but they are purely there so that when you start making, you've got an idea of what shapes you're going to need and also perhaps in some direction of what the final product will look like. In your kit you should have a bit of scrap paper and a pencil. I'm going to use felt tip because it means that you can see it better, and you can use these to kind of plan out the design of what you're going to make. In general, I like to start with a cone shape, and once you've got this kind of cone, then you can start to customise it. Anything that can start from this rough triangle shape and then get wings added on, a head added on, or kind of wiggled out to make it into more of a soft, gentle kind of arc instead. When you start with uniform shapes, it gives you the chance to customise and build from there, rather than having to worry about shaping the exact shape of an angel's body. You start with a cone, add on some wings, add a head, you've got an angel, it's great. So some of our favourites from last year I've got on the table here. So we've got a little angel, we've got a bear, he's got kind of little legs which hang out the bottom to make it ring. We've got a penguin, also a little bell this one, with a little crown, we've got an elf and a little sheep. And they all, as I said, start with this gorgeous little cone and then just have bits added on to make them look like their characters. So when you're drawing, you might want to start with that cone shape and then from there begin to add bits on or change the shape to start to make it look like your dream vision. In your kit, you will find a template for this cone shape, which is one that we've prepared for you, so you can see that when you bend it round, it does start to make that dead simple cone shape. You've also got penguin wings and little angel wings too. Once you've decided on roughly what you're going to make and you've got your templates prepared, you can then start rolling out your clay. Now, if you've been to a workshop with us before, you'll know that we generally advise rolling your clay out about the thickness of a pencil. This is because at that thickness it's nice and solid, whereas if you start rolling your clay a little bit thinner, it can make the fired pottery quite delicate. And that's because once your pottery is thin fired, it does shrink by about 10%. So that means in terms of size as well as in terms of thickness. I'd say if you're planning on making flat decorations, definitely stick to that pencil thickness. However, if you are making little bells, you can go slightly more delicate, not paper thin by any means. To roll out your clay, we're going to start by putting your tea towel, which will be in your kit, onto your table. You've got your hunk of clay, and we're just going to take your cheese wire, which is the string with the two corks. I'm going to lie it down and chop off a section. Pop it down on top of your tea towel. And then from here you're just going to give it a bit of a pummel with your hand to start flattening it down and making it a bit easier to roll. Now the amount of clay that we've given you is far more than you'll actually need for your decorations, but we'd rather give you too much stuff than not enough. And anything that you don't use, please just bundle up and put back in the bags because we can reclaim it afterwards. And reclaiming is basically the process of recycling clay so that it can be used again. Now when you're rolling out your clay, you want to roll nice and lightly. You're not putting very much pressure on at all, and it's just that you gradually start to see the clay grow in size. Now as I'm rolling as well, I'm thinking about what size my templates are and how they're going to fit onto this. It's a bit like making biscuits with kids, where you really want to maximise the number of templates or biscuits that you can get out of one bit of clay. Now you'll have noticed when I put my tea towel down then, I've pulled it really nice and taut because you don't want to have any wrinkles under your tea towel because those wrinkles will be left as indents in the bottom of your clay. Now once you think your clay is at about the right thickness, you can test it by laying a pencil down on the edge of it, and if it's about the right things for you, you've done well. I'd say test sooner rather than later, because you can always roll something thinner, but you can't roll it back thicker again. When you're rolling, try and put a really even pressure on. Now your clay is going to be much easier to roll around the edges, whereas in the centre it'll kind of stay with a bit of a bump generally, so just make sure to ease it off as you come towards the edges. Once you've got your clay to your desired thickness, we can then start cutting out some of your templates. To cut out your shapes, you're going to start just by laying the template on top of the clay. Find somewhere that it fits quite nicely, and then you're just going to skim the knife through the clay. Now it should be really easy to cut, so you don't need to put very much pressure on, and particularly when you're doing this, just to consider the surface that you're working on top of. So if you're working on top of a very precious table, you might want to put some cardboard down underneath. And then you can just gently lift your template off and lift the clay, trying really hard not to stretch it as you move it at all. And don't get rid of your scraps, you don't want to scrunch them or anything, because once you've scrunched clay up, it's no longer usable. And that's because when you scrunch it up, it folds and traps air into the clay. And then if you use that for modelling a head, there's a really high chance it'll have a little bit of air trapped in there. When air goes through the kiln, it causes the bit of pottery to explode, and that's because as the air heats up, it expands. It's trapped inside your clay, it's got nowhere else to go, so it explodes. And when it explodes, it's not just going to break your piece, there is a chance that it could break the bit next to it as well, so just try not to scrunch and reuse the clay. The first thing to take note of is that on one side of your bit of clay, there will be the texture of the tea towel from where it's been pressed on. It's up to you whether you like that or whether you'd rather kind of try and smooth it out with your finger or use the other side. For me, I'm going to use the smooth side for my bell, and then I'll make the most of the texture with the customised bits that I'm going to add on. So to make this into a cone shape, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some slurry, which is in here. It's basically just slimy clay, so scraps of clay mixed in with water, which forms a lovely gooey paste. And slurry, or slick as it's sometimes called, is used as clay glue. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply it to the two areas of clay that we're going to be joining together when we make this little cone. I also like to give it just a really gentle score, and you'll notice when I'm doing this I'm using the flat side of my knife rather than the sharp side. And that's because this is only meant to be an ever so slight graze on the surface, just to rough it up and to take you back to GCSE science lessons to increase the surface area. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of a scratch on the outside as well. And when I'm doing this, I'm thinking about which bits of my clay are actually going to be joining together. So it's going to be the inside on this side touches the top on that side. And from here I'm just going to brush a little bit of this sticky clay on top of it. And then I'm going to let that overlap. Now you might be able to see that where it's overlapped, I've got this little kind of loop at the top. I might want to make the most of this. I could always keep this shape and then add a little face in the centre. But because I'm going to try and make something a bit more like one of these angels, I'm just going to overlap it and just kind of pinch it a bit at the top to draw it into a point. And where I've got the fold here, it's quite obvious at the moment. And I've now got a decision over whether I'd rather try and blend that in and make this smooth, or whether I want to make the most of it. The way I like to make with clay is I use them as a design feature rather than trying to smooth them in and make a surface perfect. And that's partially because I like it and partially because it's much easier. So what I'm going to do is, supporting my clay from the inside, I'm just going to very gently, it's actually quite a firm press my finger into it. And that's just going to start to make these little dimples and grooves. Now if I'm thinking of this as an angel, those can be the kind of little buttons going down his chest, and I could always use kind of some of my extra tools and bits to add some pattern work to it. Now to continue making this into an angel, I could start to add on a head just by taking a small amount of clay, rolling it into a ball, and then I'll rest it on top gently just to see whether it's about the right proportions. Now if it is, I can again just apply a tiny amount of slip or slurry onto there. and then press the angel's head on. So from here I might do a little bit of customizing, kind of jiggle it around a bit and get it to actually start to look how I want it to look. Once I'm happy with it, it's then about making sure that this head is definitely attached on properly. Now you can see with our angel area here, it's got a little necklace on, and that's basically a really thin coil of clay that's used to cover up the join and also to kind of act as a bridge in between the head and the body. To do that, I'm just going to roll out a really thin bit of clay into a little coil, press in really, really lightly, and then I'm just going to rest it on top of that join. Now to add the little dimples that we've got on this one, that was just done with either a cocktail stick or a pencil. And you can just dab, 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 dab all the way around and start to really embellish your angels. Now on this one here as well, you'll notice he's got very subtle markings that indicate his face. I didn't go all out because once you start trying to get an exact nose at these tiny details, it is quite tricky. So instead, all I've done is just kind of press in a little finger here, press in a finger here, and you'll see that starts to give you this kind of nose-ish look. And then a little press underneath as well will give you the end of the nose. And I'm doing this upside down, so it's not the easiest to get it right. He's got 2 tiny little dots for eyes and a tiny little smile as well. Now that he's got a head, a smile and a little coat, we're going to start adding the finishing touches, which is going to be things like his wings, his tiny ears, and then all the pattern work around his body. Now for his wings, I'm just going to use one of the scraps of clay from earlier. I'm going to roll it out a little bit more delicate. Again, not paper thin, but just a little bit more delicate, as it doesn't need to have massively chunky wings. I'm going to use my template cutter, which is going to be the little semicircle in your kit. Same as before, rest it on top lightly and just cut it out. You might find that when you're working with your clay, it's quite soft and squishy. Once you've got the main body of your angel joined together, you can always leave them to firm up a little bit, and that'll allow you to kind of really refine them and tidy up any of these little marks. So now that I've got my little wings cut out, I'm going to do what I said earlier and make the most of that tea towel texture, and that's going to help me differentiate between the texture of the body and the texture of the wings. And to join this on, it's going to be a similar process to adding the head, where it might just be a little score along the join, a little bit of slurry, and then I'm just going to press it roughly onto where I want it to join. And I'll do the same with the other side and then have a bit of a jiggle to make sure they look right. And again, once they're joined on, just roll out those really tiny, tiny coils of clay, even tinier than last time if you want to. And you're just going to press this along that join. And that's once again going to act as that little bridge between the wing and the body. From there you can blend it in and make it completely invisible if you want to, or again you might want to embellish it and make it look like he's got some fancy trims to his wings. The method that you've used to join on his wings is exactly the same method you would use were you to want to join on little flowers onto his top or stars or anything like that. The smaller the bit of clay you're adding on, the less slurry you need to use. So for example, when I've attached his ears, I've popped them on and give them a little bit of a wiggle to make sure they feel like they're attached. And then that'll do. Now the final touches is going to be to add on these little kisses and hexagonal shapes. Now I've done them using some tools out of the ratchet set. So there's things like the ones which look like stars, which when you press them in, give you those gorgeous little star shapes. As you can see, this one here is still a little bit soft when I'm working with it. So when you work at home, you might want to take a little break, have a cup of tea and give it a chance so that it feels like it can support itself before you start stabbing it with bits and bobs. We've also got the little hexagonal ones here, which will give me, as the name describes, more shapes pressed in. You can go as mad with it as you want, but it's just a really simple way of adding extra details. The techniques we've used to make this angel would be exactly the same techniques you'd use were you to make an elf, a penguin or a sheep. All it is just kind of slightly adapting the shape of the body, adding different accessories, and with your sheeps, what I tend to do to make the bumps is I just put one finger inside, push outwards a little bit, and then use my other fingers to give it a bit of a squeeze around where I can feel that finger poking through. When you're making a home, as it says, you can make several of these kind of 3D decorations, or you could choose to make flat decorations instead. So I'm going to pop this one here to one side to firm up a little bit, and then we're going to talk about making flat decorations. When you're making your decorations, you want to think about the practicalities to go with it. How heavy it's going to be, where it's going to hang from. If you want to hang it on a really chunky ribbon, make sure the holes that you're hanging it from are big enough. The other thing as well is that when you're planning your templates to cut out your flat decorations with, think about trying to make sure bits aren't too delicate. So if you're making a star, it can be good to kind of round off the ends ever so slightly. Otherwise they could be a little bit sharp once they've been glazed and fired. Now if you have biscuit cutters at home, you could use those to cut out your flat decorations. Or you can use perhaps some cardboard from an old cereal box or something to make yourself a template. There will be minimum and maximum sizes that you could make a flat decoration. Now your minimum size is because we can't feasibly fire 1,000 tiny little bits. All of our pottery is glazed by hand by our darling Fiona, and it would take months to glaze if everyone did all these tiny bits. The other thing as well is that when things go through the kiln, they've got to balance on a stilt, which is basically 3 tiny metal prongs. And if it's too small, we can't balance it. The maximum size will be about the stress it puts on the clay. So when something's really quite big and flat, because the clay we use, it can crack when it goes through the kiln. So that's why that limit's there as well. For my template this time, I've opted for just a simple heart shape. And to cut it out, it's going to be exactly the same thing as I did to cut out the angel for the bell decoration. What you'll want to do is cut out all of your templates, and then once you've cut them out, leave them to one side just for maybe 10 minutes if it's not somewhere too hot, and this will give them a chance to firm up. Now you want them to feel like when you lift them up slightly, they're not too floppy, and this will help them to keep their shape. Once they're feeling a little bit firmer, you can start to do things like round up the edges where you cut them out and they're a little bit jaggedy. You could add on any embellishments in exactly the same way as we did with the bells. And you can also add those holes for hanging. Now in your kit you should find a little plastic straw, or you could use a straw from home as well if you prefer a different size. But with this you simply press it onto the clay, give it a little twist, and then lift it up. Now the key is when you're doing this not to squeeze at all, because if I squeeze this, it's going to change the shape of the clay inside and change the shape of the hole that it cuts. So I can keep using this, and that bit of clay inside will just keep shuffling up and up and up until it's full, and then it'll probably start shooting clay out the top. Next time you see your decorations, they won't be grey anymore. So they're going to go through a bisque kiln, at which point they'll become white like the bare clay you see here. And then you've got the choice over whether you would like to paint it or whether you'd like it to stay white and just get a clear glaze on. If you do opt for the clear glaze, because these aren't items that are going to be used to eat or drink out of, you could always use something like a gold glittery nail varnish to add little embellishments if you did want to once you've got them home. I think that's about everything you need to know for your making today. If you have got any questions, we will pop a link to a really big making video, which is when we show you how to make tea jars and things. So that might give you a little bit more information in there. I really hope you enjoy your making kit today. And if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to give us a message on Instagram or to drop us an email, and we'll get back to you with some helpful tips as soon as we can. When you're making today as well, if you do post any pictures, please give us a tag. It really helps us to spread the word about our kit.